First of all, I'd just like to say that I'd like to thank the organizing team, Daniel, Hamish, Eric John, Eric Sr., Ewan, and if I've forgotten anybody else. I said Ewan, yeah. Oh, me, oh, okay, yeah. And I want to thank, okay, thank you. I want to thank everybody who's come from afar, especially Bob and Sharon and Sean here for coming so far and being a part of this. I look at this as just being the beginning of what I think we need to be doing in this country and in America as well, because so many people are getting away from the Word of God being the Word of God. I was privileged when we lived in London, and I was a pastor there for 15 years, that there was a wealthy American who owned condominiums or flats in a 17th century manor house out in the Cotswolds, and we used to have the privilege of going out there anytime we wanted to for a break out of the middle of London, inner London, where we were ministering. And one day I had my kids in the indoor swimming pool that they had there, and met this young Englishman, and we began to talk, and he basically said, I asked him, was he a Christian? And he said, oh, well, I just don't believe in the Bible. And I said, well, really? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, let me ask you this. If God is God, and he said, yeah. I said, well, if he's God, that means he can do anything he wants to do, right? And he said, well, I guess so. And I said, well, then he could have men write the Bible. And he went, oh, I got to go. It doesn't take a seminary PhD or anything to just use a little bit of logic with people. If God is God, that's the main problem. I was playing golf down south last week with a chap that we were playing around with, and he basically said something similar. I said, well, are you a religious man, or do you go to church, or whatever? He said, oh, no. I said, well, how would you classify yourself? Were you an atheist or an agnostic? He said, well, I guess I'm an agnostic. My buddy keeps trying to convert me. And I said, well, only God can do that. But I understand what you're saying. So I was talking to him a little bit, and he said, well, I have trouble believing the Bible, certain stories like, the resurrection and the virgin birth and things like that. So we sat there and talked a little bit, and then we finished the game. And in the clubhouse we were talking, and I started saying, his name is Don. I said, Don, I think your major problem is not the Word of God, it's God himself. You don't really believe that he is God, that he can do anything. You have to kind of be able to monitor it and everything. And of course, that's the basic sin. Adam and Eve wanted to be like God, or they wanted to control. And that's what we see as the basis of sin all over the place and in our own lives, because let's face it, how many of us here would think that the world would be a whole lot better if everybody did just what we thought was the right thing to do? We like to be in control. And a few years ago, God got my attention. About 3 years ago, one of my teenage daughters had a big emotional, mental meltdown, and she had to have some, go into a psych ward for a little while. And we found out, I won't go into all of why, but we found out some stuff that went on in her life when we were living in London that wasn't good when she was a young girl. But and then I was diagnosed with some health problems, and then my father-in-law gets promoted to heaven. And 3 weeks later, then my father gets promoted to heaven. And then right after that, I had an operation that was scheduled, which went fine. But, when my father went to heaven, God really got, I don't know if that's happened to you. My mother went to heaven when she was 60 and my father when he was 89. So it was quite a gap in there. But, when your last parent leaves this world, you think, well, I'm next. I'm the patriarch of the family now. I'm the oldest son in the family. And it really gets your attention. And I started thinking, well, he was 24 years older than me, and he lived to be fairly healthy. And, most of his life, until the last couple of months, he had a heart attack and never really fully recovered from that. But he lived a full life, and he was 24 years older than me. And I think, well, even if I had 20 years of good health, that would be a blessing. Now, what am I going to do with the next 20 years? It's kind of hard to think that way, though, isn't it? Like, how much longer do we have to be in this body on this earth? And the one thing that really grabbed my attention was this. What is the most important thing that we're to do as believers? Now, the Great Commandment says we're to love God with all of our being, with body, soul, mind, with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our mind, with all of our strength. And then it goes on to say, but like unto it, the second greatest commandment is to what? Love your neighbor as yourself. That's a pretty tall order, isn't it? And in fact, you can't do that unless you love God with all your strength, right? And all your mind and all your heart. But, I started thinking about that, and I wondered, just to ask this question, is it possible for us to love God and not love our neighbor? That's tricky, isn't it? Because you think, well, yes, but, well, no. I mean, we can love God, but not, what I'm saying is it possible for us to be in fellowship with God and love God and not love the person that's next to us and, our neighbor in our home, or our neighbor across the street, or our neighbor, a colleague at work, or sports, or whatever. It's kind of hard, to love God and not really love those people as well. But, what if our neighbor was speeding down the road and you happened to come that way earlier and you knew the bridge was out, but they hadn't put a sign up there, and he was speeding down the road? Would you jump out almost in front of the car and say, stop, you're going to fall to your death, you're going to go off, and you're going to die? Or you're walking by someone's house and they're in there eating a meal, and you see them through the window and the house is on fire, there's just flames coming from the roof, and they're sitting in there just eating. And would you just go knock on the door and say, look, your house is on fire, please get out of here, you're going to die? But why is it that we as believers aren't willing to obey as well the Great Commission? Now, Billy Graham's son, Franklin Graham, quoted a survey, which I can't remember the name of the survey, but it said that 90% of born-again believers will never lead anybody to Christ in their whole life. 90%. Now, where we come from, we've got a politician that's saying, let's make America great again, right? And, I hope somebody does, because we're in deep trouble. But let me say this. The only way we can make America great again, or put the great back into Britain, is to believers taking the Great Commission seriously. Put the Great Commission back into place. We were in Liverpool last week, and we went out for a little over an hour, knocking on doors in a pretty rough area, or used to be a rough area, called Croxteth, if you know it. And we had some tremendous conversations with people. And I got all the way through the gospel with many, many people and asked them, do you want to be born again? And on that day, nobody said that they would. One lady said, yeah. And I said, well, would you like me to pray with you? And she said, oh, you mean right now? And I said, yeah, right now. And she said, well, no, I'm not ready right now. But, we challenged her a little bit and moved on. But when we got back to the church building, we were having a little prayer time for all the people that we had talked to, and we had 4 teams out, and people were sharing experiences. We heard a knock on the door at the church. This young lady named Cassie came up, and she had overheard a couple of our team members talking to her grandfather, who was an atheist, but he was polite. And she came and knocked on the door because she was an alcoholic, and she'd been going to AA, 21 years old. And they told her that she needed to believe in a higher power. And she came and said, I heard you talking to my grandfather, and I need to believe in a higher power, but I don't know how. And one of the guys with us on the team had a drink problem before he was saved. He was a pastor now, so he led her to the Lord. She knocked on the door and said, what must I do to be saved? Now, not everybody's going to do that, but if we hadn't gone out that day, I believe the word of God. It says what? The fields are white unto harvest. The harvest is plentiful, but what's the problem? No workers. Now just think what would happen. We went out for an hour and a little bit. If everybody here went out for an hour and just talked to people, and we say, if you have an hour and a half conversation with somebody, that's great. If you just talk to one person. But keep going until you can make connection with somebody and that you can have an opportunity to go as far as they will let you with the gospel. Now, to me, I know it's not a very popular saying these days in the nature of how people share the gospel in most Christian evangelical circles, especially in this country, is winning souls. Well, my goal in life is to win as many souls, in other words, take as many people to heaven with me as I can before God calls me there. Now, what would happen if all of us, just in this room, decided, it's real easy to play church, isn't it? It's real easy to get really involved in doing really good things in church, and we never, ever challenge anybody. And for years, I kind of got, by osmosis, picked up on this way of sharing the gospel, and I would basically just give people the facts, and I talk to a lot of people because I'm by nature gifted as an evangelist from God. But I wasn't saying to people, would you like to be born again? Just asking them, Matthew 7:7. Ask what? Ask and it'll be given to you. Seek and you will what? Knock. And I know I wasn't talking about door-to-door ministry, but knock and the door will be open. I just believe that, we need to challenge people. And since I've been doing that for the last 3 years, I've seen more people saved, or at least say they were, trust the Lord, than I had in the 10 years before that when I was just out there kind of sharing the information with people, because that's what it really comes down to. I hate to use marketing terms, but I used to be in sales, and you can go and tell everybody about your product all you want to, but unless you try to close the deal, you get real hungry, in life. So I'm not trying to say, a lot of people look at me like, oh, well, you're trying to save people. Well, no, only God can save people. But he's also told us, he told Paul in Acts 26, what? Get up. He had knocked him down, blinded him. Get up, and I want you to go. I want you to go and open their eyes. I want you to lead them from darkness to light, from the power of Satan to God. And I'm just saying, let's stop being embarrassed about the Word of God, and let's stand on the Word of God with the confidence of God that he can do anything because he is God and that he wants to save people all over the place. And see, I used to try to say, well, maybe he hadn't chosen that one, or maybe he hadn't chosen that one. Well, that's another story. But look, I believe when you go out with the gospel and you share it with people, and you're not just sharing it, but you're calling them to salvation. You're saying, would you like to be born again? Or would you like to be saved? Once you've explained the gospel to them, and they give you that. Because, we not only have the good news, we have the great news, because the good news is this: you don't have to die. Now think about that. You don't have to die. I mean, obviously this body of clay is going to die, but death cannot hold us, and there are people all over the place. I was just talking to a guy, Wayne over here, named John, at one of these woolen mill places where you can buy scarves and everything. Do you know him? He said he knew you. His name is John. Well, anyway, he was talking about how he liked his church and different stuff like that. But hopefully I can go back over and catch him before he goes home, because he's real chatty. And I didn't have I usually try to carry track our Gospel of John with me. I'm going to go back and try to see if I can lead him to the Lord, because he was just talking away and he said, God bless you. But I kind of got the feeling that he really didn't know the Lord. There are people everywhere that just want to talk to us. I mean, we talk to people all the time about stuff. Let's start connecting with them and sharing with them and winning them. That's my goal, and I hope you pray that we'll put the great back into Britain, and America will be great again, because they were great because of the Great Commission, the gospel, and the Great Commission of God. And I know back in the day, back in the 1800s, the second thing people said after they were introduced to you was, are you saved? And nowadays we can't even muster, because I don't know why, but we just need to start believing God and obeying. It's not the great option. It's become the great omission, but it's the great commission. So let's go for it. And I hope you'll share sometime with me, if I ever see you again, Somebody that you've led to Christ just recently, because it's the greatest thrill in this life. Because it's the only thing that we can take with us from this life is the soul of another person. The only thing. Thank you.